Okay, this is Joe Sansalone and Neghar Fonooni, and we're going to be demonstrating the prone Y exercise. It's the corrective prehab exercise that deals with upper trap dominance in particular. We're just going to demonstrate the reach, roll, and lift technique, which is really good at facilitating the proper position and proper mechanics of the overhead position. So here we go. Neghar, you're going to lay down prone here on your stomach. And she's going to reach her arms out over her head into a Y-type position, like so. The main focus here when dealing with upper trap dominance and trying to get the proper overhead position to be patterned is to get the scapula to position itself correctly on the T-spine and to get the humerus here to sit in the proper position, the centered position, the center of rotation here in the joint. So the main thing we need to do is get people that are very upper trap dominant, that tend to go all up into their neck a lot, to get them to facilitate the lower trap, to bring back the balance here in the scapula, get the position correct so that the rotator cuff can fire properly, keeping the shoulder inside the joint where it belongs. The reach, roll, and lift technique is very good at facilitating that. So the first thing she's going to do is basically eccentrically load the lower trap with a reach. She's going to reach as far as she can. She's going to kind of reach out, trying to make her arms longer into a Y-type position. The next thing she's going to do is she's going to externally rotate from the shoulder at the same time, bringing the scapula, depressing it down or sliding it down the back at the same time, trying to pull this humerus down into the socket as she externally rotates. This will facilitate the rotator cuff contraction, the lats contraction, as well as the lower trap, and kind of get that sequencing and rhythm and correct positioning here of the scapula on the T-spine. From here, she's going to maintain this exact position, using the lower trap to keep the scapula in this position. Using the deltoid here, she's going to do shoulder flexion and maintain the position over the head. The height of the arm isn't really important. What's important is that she doesn't substitute spinal extension for the motion. Go ahead and relax and bring it down. And she doesn't go back into upper trap dominance when the load is presented here. Okay, so one more time, what she's going to do is eccentrically load the lower trap by elevating or sliding through the shoulder blade. This gives room and makes position here and really can bring in the patterning of the scapula and the shoulder. And then she's going to do external rotation of the shoulder joint while she goes ahead and tries to depress the shoulder into this shoulder blade down the T-spine. From here, we're going to go ahead and try to do a lift motion. The lat should be fired, the lower trap should be fired. The upper traps will be fired too, because this is a nice sequence here that positions the shoulder and shoulder blade in the right position and patterns the overhead motion and starts to deal with some of that upper trap dominance and bring back the balance with the lower trap. One thing to be really cognizant of here is if someone doesn't have proper overhead mobility, getting into this overhead position will be very difficult and won't be necessarily appropriate. What we have to do first is get through some of the mobility issues, do some soft tissue work, get the person into overhead position. If you'd like to still do the Y to help pattern the range of motion they have, you need to elevate them somewhat, either get them onto a bench and work within the range of motion they have, which may not be all the way up in this fully flexed position like she is now. Another thing that can be done is if they do a lot of spinal extension as compensation. Oftentimes the person when they're first learning to use the lower trap and position the scapula, they will tend to take away that shrug, but by substituting instead with a nice lumbar arch instead, and really trying to lift their arms almost with their low back. Then the thing to do that I've seen is probably to put the person over the stability ball, get them to fire their hip flexors, driving their knees into the stability ball, doing some reciprocal inhibition here of the spinal extensors, so that they then have less potential to compensate with their spinal extensors when they try to pattern up here. The next thing that sometimes will happen is that even if a person has enough mobility, this long lever here of their arms being so stretched out, and they'll be so weak through the lower trap, but when they go to do the motion, they'll go ahead and they'll do the nice elevation, they'll get that nice eccentric load against here, they'll be able to slide and put everything in position because they have the overhead mobility, they'll be able to get here, you can help them pattern here. But then when they go to lift, to try to maintain it, they'll go right back up, go ahead and try to lift, and they're going to go right back up into their upper traps like this again. And it's just not that they just don't have the strength to deal with this kind of load, this horizontal load here. So the next thing we'll show is a nice regression, and sometimes what I think might be even the best place to start with patterning is a vertical loaded position, a face the wall Y, which sometimes really helps to deal with that. And one last point is that we really want to try to get back to getting into the overhead position. We don't want to necessarily be in this outside Y position, because the overall goal is to pattern the overhead position. The overhead position is with the shoulder directly over top, the elbow and wrist directly over top of the shoulder. So we do want to eventually get back to this tall position here. Of course, there's more room for error when you're in this position, and it doesn't really give the direct line of pull against the lower trap. So once we have good patterning of the lower trap out here in a more of a Y position, we then want to start trying to get people back to this position. I think that's even more important than loading this movement, is getting back to being able to actually do the motion. Then let's do the motion here where we reach to eccentrically load through here and then externally rotate and pull in, and then try to lift in this more overhead position right here. I think this is really important. And I'll bring the camera close so you can really see this motion right here. I know you can't really see it from over there. And back down. I think that's really key, is getting back to being able to actually pattern the overhead motion. We want to remember it's not just about getting the lower trap to work. It is, but we want to actually get that good sequencing of the lat, the lower trap, even the upper trap. We want to get that positioning and patterning over the head correct. Thanks. We'll now demonstrate this a little bit closer up.